Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the 10-minute Bible lesson. Hey, listen, I just want to tell you that we appreciate you taking the time to watch and listen to these lessons. Now, if you've been listening lately, you know that we've been looking at lessons from the book of Psalms. In fact, today will be the last lesson from Psalms, because the next time we'll skip over to another subject. We're going to be looking at the miracles of Jesus. Now, last time we looked in Psalm 139, and we're going to be back in that psalm today because it's a wonderful, wonderful psalm. Now, I have to ask you a question, and here's the question. How well do you think that God knows you? Do you think that God knows you? And if He does, how well does God know you? Can I just tell you that God knows us really, really well? In fact, that's kind of the subject of our lesson today in Psalm 139, verses 1 and 2. Let's look at them and see what it says. So David said, O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thought afar off. So how well does God know us? Listen, He knows everything about us. Everything. He knows us better than we know ourselves. Much better than we know ourselves. Here's an amazing statement that Jesus said in Matthew 10:30. He made the statement and said that God knows the number of hairs that are on our head. Now, I just think that's an amazing thing. So, one of the things that makes God God is that He's omniscient. That is to say, God knows everything. That's right. Listen, there's nothing that He doesn't know. Nothing that He doesn't know about you. He knows everything about you and everything about me. In fact, David said in this passage, he said this, he said, God had searched him and known him. I would just say this, that I believe that God searches the hearts of all men. And you could say, uh-oh. I could say, uh-oh. But you know what? That's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be a bad thing, can it? Especially if there's a lot of bad things in our heart. But it can be also a good thing. That is to say that He knows us better than anyone. And I think that could be a good thing. That is to say, He understands us. Now, sometimes people don't understand us. I'm sure that you have been misunderstood. Probably many, many times. Listen, we're never misunderstood to God. Even when we lack the ability to explain how we feel to other people, sometimes it just doesn't come out right, and they maybe take it wrong, maybe we say it the wrong way, and it's not the way we feel inside at all. And sometimes things just gets messed up. Listen, that never happens with God. Because God understands who we are. He understands what we mean. And He knows what we think. So listen, even when we can't probably communicate it to other people. So He searched us and He's known us. And I think that's an important thing. In fact, He says this. He said He understands our thought afar off. And I think that's amazing. Now let's look at the next two verses. That would be verses 3 and 4 in Psalm 139. Let's go on and see what he says here. He says this about God. He says, you comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. So God knows where we walk, and He knows how we walk, because He comprehends our paths. That is to say, He knows when we lay down at night and go to bed. He knows when we get out of bed. Listen, he knew when you got out of bed this morning. Because he knows it. He knows when we lay down. He knows. In fact, he's acquainted with our ways. The psalmist said this, he's acquainted with all of our ways, everything about us. Listen, he's familiar with the way we are. And everyone has a different personality and a different way that they are. And our ways determine the way we are. And so God knows that. So another thing that he said that God knows our speech. That's what David said. He said this, he said that he knows every word on our tongue. Now that should give us pause. To think about that God knows what we're saying. And actually there's a place in the New Testament where it says every idle word that men shall speak, they shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. And by our words we'll be justified, or by our words we'll be condemned. And Psalmist said this, that God knows everything that's on our tongue. And no one knows us as well as God. Let's look at the last three verses. That's verses 5, 6, and 7, and see what David said about how God knows us. He says this, he says, you have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high. I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? Listen, is there someone who actually cares about me? You could ask that question. Is there someone that honestly, really cares about you? And I'm sure that all of us at one time in our life, and maybe many times, especially during the dark days of our life, we've asked the question, is there anyone who cares for us? And I will just say this, that the Bible has the answer to that question. And the answer is a strong yes. Now, the psalmist said this in Psalm 27:10. He said, when my father and my mother forsake me, then the Lord will take care of me. Now, that's an amazing thing. Hopefully, it'll never happen where our father and mother forsake us. But if it happened, the psalmist said, even if that happened, the Lord would take care of us. So, I think it's an interesting thing. Now, if we're trusting the Lord, and that's an important thing, He will put a protective hedge around us. He will lay His hand upon us. Of course, the Psalm says this. He says this. He says, you have hedged me behind and before, and laid your hand upon me. Can you imagine what that may be? That God, those that trust Him and those that follow Him, will put a protective hedge around us. And not only that, but it says this, it says that He will lay His hand upon us. Now, imagine what that would be, having the hand of God upon your life. I would say that all of us would love to have the hand of God upon our life. And David, this is what it made him say. So David has to exclaim that knowing these things about God's care for him is overwhelming. And that's what he says here. He says, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. And he just can't hardly grasp it. He says it's just too high. It's too high. It's higher than anything that I have ever known. And he's actually saying this, listen, I've never known anywhere in a relationship with someone else that cares about me that much. And he says, listen, I just can't hardly get I'm saying this, you can't hardly get your head wrapped around it. And then lastly, he says this. He also says this, that there's nowhere that God will not be there with me. That's what he says. He says, where can I go from your spirit? Or where can I flee from your presence? Is there anywhere that we could go that God wouldn't be there and watching over us? According to the Bible, there's not anywhere. Listen, I think that if you were an astronaut and you took a shot up into space, even went to Mars, God would be there, because there's no place that we could go and escape Him. I love the Psalms, don't you? I find them just encouraging. It's like medicine. It's like healing medicine to my soul, to my heart. And I appreciate you tuning in today. I hope you'll join us next time, and I hope you have a really good week. Read your Bible every day.